Welcome to the Cables to Clouds podcast. Cloud adoption is on the rise, and many network infrastructure professionals are being asked to adopt a hybrid approach. As individuals who have already started this journey, we would like to empower those professionals with the tools and the knowledge to bridge the gap.
Hello, and welcome back to the Cables to Clouds podcast. My name is Alex Perkins, and I will be your host for today's episode. Joining me, as always, are my two illustrious co-hosts, Chris Miles and Tim McConaughey. Chris, how's your week been?
It's good, man. Man, not much going on. The World Cup, the Women's World Cup is going on here, which is nice. So I've been watching a few of those games. There's obviously been a lot of tourism, people come to support and things like that, which is super cool. So, I guess go Team USA. I usually don't root for the USA, but in this scenario, I will.
We'll allow it. Yeah.
The Women's World Cup is it's funny because, of course, it has the double negative of being soccer in the U.S. and also being a women's sport. So it's double, nobody watches it, right? But the Women's World, if you look at the women's U.S. national team, they crush every World Cup, man. How many times have they won now? They kill it, dude, and people just don't watch. It's really kind of sad, actually.
Yeah, it's crazy. They're world-class athletes that absolutely run the gambit on their game and don't get any clout for it. It's crazy. Yeah, they're insanely talented.
Yeah, compared to the men's team, right? You watch the men's team, and I can't remember the last time we made it past the semifinals in the men's World Cup. Anyway.
All right. Tim, what about you? I know your trip to Japan is coming up quick, right?
Yeah, actually, that's why we're stacking these, right? Because we want to make sure we have enough content to cover it while I'm out of country. So Chris mentioned we're recording a few of these, kind of back to back. So yeah, there's not going to be a lot new to talk about. But yeah, I mean, I'm a week out now, so it's getting real. We're getting all the stuff, doing our last minute Amazon shopping for stuff that we forgot to, need to throw in the luggage and all of that stuff, man. I'm excited.
Nice. Well, I hope it's awesome, man. I'm sure you're going to have plenty to talk about when you get back and we record an episode.
Yeah.
All right. So we also have a returning guest today that will be joining in our roundtable discussion. His name is William Collins. If you want to know more about Will, we've actually, he was a guest on episode 7, which was Terraform for the Network Engineer. So Will, what have you been up to since last we spoke? Anything new?
I think you might know, but so it's summer break. Kids are out of school, and my in-laws are in Pennsylvania. So my wife flew out there, spending some time there. So I've got the house all to myself. So I'm ripping out carpet, putting in vinyl plank, trimming, painting. It's been such a not relaxing, quiet house. So yeah, keeping busy.
I was going to say, I keep seeing you posting pictures of just tearing everything out and your workbench all ready to go.
It's exhausting. I've been starting at 8, 9 p.m., and just kind of working till midnight, on the weekdays. And then this last weekend, I just killed it, Saturday and Sunday, all day long. So trying to get finished. I'm going to drive up and pick them up, probably spend a few days there, get some sun. So
nice.
Yeah.
Take at least some time to relax. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So today's roundtable episode is about being cost aware when designing cloud networks. The cloud is not cheap, as we discussed in our recent episode around economies of scale. So the plan today is to talk about some of the things we should be looking out for and maybe some of the compromises that may have to be made, in the name of saving costs. So to kick it off, why is it important for network engineers to think about cost when designing cloud network solutions? And since Will, you're the guest, we'll go ahead and kick it off with you.
All right. So yeah, cloud is not cheap at all. And Just like, on premises, we came from the world of, building data centers, and we had a good idea of, okay, we got circuit costs, we have, our hardware, we have our procurement, we kind of know what's going on, and we're planning till, we have like a 6-year refresh cycle on some things. It's not a lot to keep track of. So you get into cloud is different. VPC Lattice, recent AWS release at the last year's reInvent comes to mind. If you look at just understanding the resource costing, you have the charge of, data that you're moving, your gigabit charge, but then you get charged per hour and per the number of requests as well. So you have 3 different charges that you're dealing with. So if you're a network engineer, you've got to understand that foundation. You got to understand what you're building. There's going to be a lot of applications running on it. You're going to have just to worry about the scale. You're going to have to worry about these costs inflating and blowing out the spend. And, once that's in place, it's like concrete. Good luck ripping it out, because you're going to have production applications running. So, being aware of how the resources work and how the charging for the resources, works, and understanding what you're going to use them for as well. So, solving the right problem with the right solution.
So quick question on that, right? So you mentioned VPC Lattice and understanding like the requests and stuff. Do you think that is going to be the responsibility of the network engineer? I know the answer is it depends, right? And it's going to be, every organization is going to be different. But in your mind, what do you think? Like, how do you bridge that gap between the network engineer doing that and then talking to the application owner that should be giving you that information?
That's a good question. Yeah, it depends. But the, VPC Lattice it was ultimately invented so devs or cloud platform teams didn't have to worry about the network. There was a thread ages ago. I'd have trouble trying to dig it out, but it was from Nick Matthews a long time ago about, a long thread about why VPC Lattice, because I think he was on the product team that, started teasing that out and building out the requirements for it. And yeah, it's, these network folks, these salty network folks, they're slow. They always just say no. We want to get moving. So it's supposed to empower devs to really, move on their own without having to worry about the network. But every time I've seen something like that released into the wild and devs take over, yeah, there's always some gotchas and some catches that end up,
someone else should have caught that.
Yeah, spilling mayonnaise on it. It just happens.
I'm glad you said it, because this isn't obviously not a VPC Lattice episode. But when you asked that question, Alex, I was thinking the exact same thing. Actually, the first I was thinking was, well, the question really is, who's going to own VPC Lattice? Is it going to be the developers, or is it going to be the network engineers? But it's a whole different episode, right? But yeah, so I like what you said about the concrete, the foundation, and all of that, and it being just a pain in the ass to rip up once you've laid it. But for your original question, Alex, about network engineering and specifically being cost conscious in the cloud, it's like the data center. It's like when we were in the data center, but it's so much different, right? Because now you can't see the cables. You're not filling racks of gear, right? There's not 32 rack units to fill up with gear. It's worse, right? Because it's like the ultimate microtransaction game now. So do I have to pay? And you start stacking the charges, right? It's 0.005 cents per gigabit per hour. Oh, but if you go across availability zones, tack on an extra 0.001 per gigabit per hour. And, if you're going to egress, it really is just like the stack.
It sounds small at first, right? But you start adding all these pieces together that nobody's thinking about, and
yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it's like this purely consumption model where you didn't have on-prem, right? Because, while, certain hardware vendors might be licensing you to, use specific ports on the on the kit that you've already bought from them, but they're not charging you egress on how much you push through that port, right? That's a foreign thing that we've all had to adapt to invest in whenever we design these networks, right? We gotta consider cross AZ traffic. We gotta consider cross region traffic, egress to on-prem, right? It's and the number one question is, I work with customers all the time, and one of our main questions we ask at the beginning is, what are your expectations as far as, throughput and, egress and things like that? Like, what are you pushing today? And most of them are like, no idea. They have no clue.
So true.
Yeah, it sucks because it's something you obviously have to consider when you move to the cloud, but you don't have the data to project what it's going to cost in the first place. And I think that might be why people have that sticker shock.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm just going to add a point here. That's kind of like an underlying theme is, right. It's really important for network engineers, especially, to understand how all the other things interact. Because like we were talking about with Lattice, nobody really knows where things get handed off, right? It's kind of just, as you notice, we all have something to say about this, which means a lot of the time things just get thrown onto the network and, they'll figure out how the applications talk to each other. And that means we're expected to know how to optimize cost as well. And sometimes that's much more difficult than it sounds. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and not only do we have to optimize, try to figure out how the app works in order to optimize it. And in the cloud, that might be a little bit easier because of the whole loose coupling model should, in theory, break out the monolith a little bit more, even though it makes networking even more important than it ever was, on-prem, for even just the basic connectivity. That an app used to be monolith. You put it all on one server and you only had to care about, it's got to reach out to a database or behind a firewall or whatever. Now it's like loose coupled. So you have to know way more about the app than you ever did before and how the app communicates.
I don't see how large businesses can do. It's so hard if you have like multiple lines of business or business units and you're adopting cloud rapidly. How in the world can you do like accurate forecasting? It's the simple answer is you really can't. It's difficult.
I feel like I haven't mentioned this word in many episodes, so I'm glad I finally get to bring it back. But service mesh, this always brings me back to, there's got to be some kind of tie-in, especially like Tim, you were mentioning microservices. There's got to be some kind of way that someone will come up with to tie in, like service registry type stuff into cost. It's got to happen at some point. So I will continue to stand on that.
Yeah.
All right. So what options do people have to gauge cloud spend? And, feel free to touch on, this can be single or multi-cloud, and specific products, non-cloud native, we'll call them, versus like a CSP native solution. What are some of the things you guys see? Tim, you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah. I mean, so I forget what the acronym is. I think it's CFN or something like that. The Cloud Financial something or other. There are. What am I thinking of? Is it Aptio? I forget the name of some of the ones out there that basically will go dig through your. It's not Aptio. Will go dig through your AWS CloudWatch logs and like ingest it and spit out reports about how you're spending and stuff like that. I'll remember before too long. I just forgot the name, but there's several out there that. That's all they do, right? They take the telemetry that, say AWS or Azure or whatever, you're capturing it and you're sending it to the cloud native log ingestion engine, whatever it is. They'll pull it out, or you export it or whatever. You have a job, export it to them. And then they produce some rich reporting about, hey, these lines of business or these accounts are spending this much. And it's a big industry. There's actually quite a lot of money in the money, if you will.
Yeah, and you also got to pay for those services.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can come in here next. I've got a few thoughts. So the one good thing is, of course, these cloud providers they're like API first, with everything that they're doing. Whereas like on premises, you have like maybe different vendors. Some are CLI based, some might have API. Like you have all these different pockets of stuff that operate so differently. But in cloud, you have these APIs. So there's a lot of, like CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management. I know this isn't necessarily a cloud like a costing tool, but something valuable that I've learned and I've seen, a lot of enterprises, come to the conclusion of is it's good to know what's out there. A lot of times because cloud, it's just so easy to deploy things, and things were getting deployed way back like 10 years ago. And you've got all these AWS accounts, you've got resources everywhere. Okay, like how many internet gateways do we have out there? Or how many, security groups do we have out there? How many NAT gateways? And a lot of times, you might have a ballpark guesstimate, but when you take that a step further and you're like, okay, maybe I'm multi-cloud, how is this working across multiple clouds? How many gateway types everywhere? And those things have a tendency to, and then you see these, these tools come in and they get all this data, they bring it back to you and they show you can build some queries and okay, I have this many internet gateways. And you can say, okay, I don't need this many internet gateways. That's actually a problem. Security's sweating. They're not going to sleep good that night. And, so you want to get that under control. And that, it's always important to know what's out there too. And then, the cost. And another thing too, I'm not a big advocate of just the percent or the approach of saying, hey, we'll just buy something off the shelf to do that after we've got millions of dollars of cloud stuff running. Like the real focus and the real strategy has got to be, whatever they call it, shift left. You want that to be integrated before things are getting deployed. So you want to get that under control. That should be the number one focus, unless there's some security events you're dealing with. So get it under control before it gets deployed. Because like we sort of teased out earlier, once it's deployed, good luck.
Well, how do you think that impacts the whole, what's the word I'm looking for? The value prop of agility, though? Because I agree with you, by the way. I do agree with you, especially as a network engineer. I agree with you. The idea should be that it should be an iterative process. We dip our toes in, we get an idea of, especially if we don't already know what our apps are doing, for example. We need to find that out, and we need to do it before we're committed to a certain architecture and before we've spent $10 million. But it seems like that would necessarily slow down the whole agility prop, the value prop for the cloud there.
Yeah, it does. And that's the thing. Like I was having it was a good spirited debate, I would say, with someone about automation in the cloud. And my take on it was, yeah, automation can make you go fast, but I see like the real value proposition of like automation is building in standards into that code and like locking certain things down. So you're deploying the same thing and you know what the security posture is again and again and again. So, it's, you have that reference architecture. Like I'm not doing it to go really fast. I'm doing it to have really good standards that marry back to some blueprint or design, like a design pattern that I have. So that going that direction, you're not doing it with an agility first approach. And just like with cloud, you've got the benefits of scale. You've got the benefits of, okay, you can make DR happen much quicker. Like if we're doing DR like 15 years ago, it's like, okay, we're ordering circuits. We've got to, spin up another data center. Maybe we have another data center. Maybe they're active standby. Maybe we want to go active. We've got a lot of different things happen there. Zerto's doing circuit grooming. We've got some outages. We've got all this stuff going on that's just, it takes forever. So when you kind of like looking back and, looking at perspective, if you look at like where we were versus like where we are now, we're still really agile. But we don't want to go so fast and create a mess that impacts the business and the bottom line, because you still have to sell or whatever your market is, and you've got to be efficient, and you have competitors in your market. So you've got to, stay in that competition, stay in the hunt.
Yeah. I mean, these are all awesome points. So, Chris, do you have any specific products that come to mind, or anything of customers are using? And again, that's single or multi-cloud, and they can be non-CSP vendors that provide them, or CSP native tools.
Not necessarily, not nothing that hasn't already been called out. I think that is a space that is. I mean, it's not lacking. There's definitely plenty of companies that are going to tell you how much you're spending, but that forecasting and that design piece it's hard to incorporate. So no, not much to add there.
If you Google like cloud financial management, I think, which was the M, I couldn't remember what the M was for. Dude, there's so many companies you've never heard of, but like they all say like, we'll look at your cloud, we'll ingest the details, and we'll tell you where you're wasting money. We'll tell you how to save money. Like I think of like the CSP native ones, like what is it? Amazon, is it Inspector or Advisor? It's Advisor, I think, that does that'll look at your like running instances and make recommendations on sizing and stuff like that too.
Yeah. And the one that comes to mind for me that you were talking about, we'll look at through all your contracts and stuff, is what Duckbill Group, right?
Oh yeah.
You always see Corey Quinn on
yeah
everywhere, just posting things. And they had some tweet recently. I think the CEO posted it that they saved like some hundred millions for customers over like a quarter or something. That's how insane.
Which is
some of these
insane.
costs balloon.
More than the GDP of a nation in cloud
real.
savings.
And then there's only one more thing I wanted to call out. And Will, I think you might have told me about this a long time ago. There's like a tool called InfraCost. So it's like a CLI, or not a CLI, like a automation tool, right? That you add into some of your automation pipelines. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah. So my idea of what the value prop is. So look, developers, honestly, they're not going to care about cost. It's not the
Right.
first thing that they're thinking about. Or even your cloud platform teams, like they're building infrastructure. They're trying to support the business, trying to support product teams or something. And another thing that I know about developers is they don't like spreadsheets. They're not going to be tallying cost and looking at price sheets and stuff. They just it's not their world. They're not accountants. You hired these rockstar developers to write rockstar code that is going to transform your business. So one of the, I got really obsessed a long time ago because like I had this idea that, again, back to my point of like trying to catch things before they get in there, but like how can you enable, like instead of wringing them over the neck, like, look, you spent this much, you left this on, you did these things, how do you empower your technical staff with the tools and the know-how to see how much something is going to cost? So what InfraCost does, and you can stick it in your pipeline, like if you use GitHub Actions or like Azure DevOps. That's not DevOps anymore. It's, I don't remember, like Microsoft.
They've renamed another one.
Azure Intra DevOps, maybe.
Yeah, like the 500th rename. But yeah, you can just build another stage in that pipeline. So the infrastructure you're going to deploy, maybe you choose the biggest instance possible. And then it'll calculate how much that's going to be over a given period of time and pop up for the person that has to do, like usually if you're doing some sort of code review, you're not going to review your own, pull request. You're going to have 2 or 3 other reviewers. So maybe either you see that and you're like, oh, that's so expensive, I don't want to do that. Or, the reviewer does, AKA you get, you catch it before it gets pushed into an elevated branch and makes it out in the wild.
That's
so
a really
that's what
cool
it does.
idea.
It just sees what, the costs are for the infrastructure out there and what you're going to do there.
Yeah, maybe you have like a finance person doing one of the approvals or something,
If it hasn't happened yet, it's coming.
Recently, I don't know how long they've had this feature, but there's also an estimated cost. Like if you're using a service like Terraform Cloud, like whenever you run your speculative plans in Terraform Cloud, there's an estimated cost for the infrastructure you're deploying. Don't know how accurate it is, and don't know where that data is actually pulled from, and et cetera.
Yeah,
but
estimated.
right. But yeah, so that's another cool thing where it's incorporated into the deployment pipeline, right, where you see it ahead of time, which is that's very useful to have, assuming that it's correct.
Yeah, for so much using OpenAI there's a lot of tools that are piggybacking on the AI revolution. And it's getting better and better. Like some stuff, I've tested a ton of stuff. some of it started out pretty rough, but it's getting better. And I think you're going to see the accuracy, just continue to climb as time goes on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, their tools are only going to get better. Okay, Chris, we'll give you this next one. So how do we design a cloud network with minimizing cost in mind? Like what are some of the strategies there?
Yeah. I think the easiest thing to call out is that you do need to kind of be aware of that consumption model that we've touched on already. Whenever you're developing these designs and things that you're doing, right? Because I've seen common deployments where customers just think, we're deploying this many different VPCs across this many regions, et cetera, right? Each one of these VPCs we're deploying needs access to, S3. So we're going to throw an S3 endpoint in there. They need access to the internet for patches. So we're going to throw a NAT gateway in there, right? But if you're doing all these things on a per VPC basis, you pay hourly for all these services, for all these endpoint services, for NAT gateways, things like that. So obviously the price of that can scale up very quickly, right? I think people need to maybe consider this kind of more centralized model, where there's, you need to consider what goes into your shared services piece of your network versus, scattered across all your entire landscape, right? Just to bring down those hourly costs. I feel like that's the easy grab bag, so I'll throw that one out there. But yeah.
That's interesting. The specifically you talk about the NAT gateway model as egress, because and then like a centralized model, because I was actually thinking of something very similar, and getting into the cost aware piece of it, or designing for costs. There's just so many different ways that the cost is figured into it that it makes it very difficult, even when you know what the flow is going to be, to actually accurately predict. Like, for example, I've got 10 VPCs, I've got workloads in every VPC. Is the cheapest thing to do to put a NAT gateway in every VPC and have that NAT gateway, do egress, have those workloads egress directly to the internet? And let's set security aside for the moment, because obviously that is a whole other thing, right? Or should I centralize it? And if I centralize it, should I centralize it in such a way that I'm trying to minimize VPC peering, or am I using VPC peering? Is there a transit gateway that I need to be involved? Am I worried about cross AZ and egress charges? And like it's actually extremely challenging, even when you know the end-to-end flow.
The transit gateway thing is awesome. A good call out, because maybe people don't know this, but there are actually regions that don't even have transit gateway yet. This is really my point is, you have to also pay attention and keep up with new products and how things change and future announcements that come out, because of things like whatever region that doesn't have a transit gateway, they're going to be doing things differently. And then one day it's going to become available. Somebody's got to remember to change the architecture after new products come huge. Out. Right? Like that's a big one and there's no way to standardize that. So that's
huge. Going back to it.
Yeah.
I think thinking too, most companies I talk to have some sort of direct connect, interconnect, express route, fast connect thing, which is, your layer 2, like, hey, we're not going to use internet for everything. Right. We want to have this private network, and we want to, bring that back. Usually, most of the time, I see it as they have a lot of data on premises. They're going to do like migrations. They need some, like a big pipe to, pipe everything up to the cloud. But a lot of times it's like, oh, we're going to start with 10 gig. We're just going to, it's just like in the days of the VMs. I mean, I'm guilty of this. When I would request a VM in the data center, it's like, oh, I'm going to dial up the specs on this and make sure that, I'm taken care of, because I don't know how long it's going to take for them to update it if I need it updated, right. Change management.
Overbuild it, yeah.
We've all done it.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, I'll abuse that power a little bit. But with express routes and direct connects, and you got to think if you're you're coloing it out to connect to cloud, you want to be mindful of all the hardware that you're putting in that colo, because you're going to have to refresh it. And if it's just, like, look, if you need to drive to the grocery store, like, you don't need to go buy a Ferrari. You can ride a bike or get a Toyota Camry. They're great cars. I had one a long time ago. It lasted forever. Reliable as, anything else.
That's a good point.
So this is like a sub point, and anyone can chime into this. Do you think there's a tendency to over engineer solutions because it's so easy to do in the cloud? I mean, you literally just click a box. Like we've talked about this before. You click a box and you have a global CDN, right? It's so easy to
make it easy on purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's any question, right?
No, definitely no question. They for sure make it very easy and inviting for you.
Yeah, and it depends on who's clicking the button too, or who's doing what, and like what level of, control they have to do it without like change management and a proper set of eyes on things. The more that gets deployed out there. And here's the thing, like whenever you deploy, you have stuff going out in the cloud. Networking oftentimes is like the last team to know about some stuff going down. It's like, oh, we're the last people invited to the party, stay
That's
away.
True.
So then when we get invited to that party, there's a lot of stuff that's already going on and they don't want to have to go back and do rework. So then just like in the data center days, we're expected to come in and we have to do what we have to do to make it work. And part of that is a lot of times over engineering something that should have been simple from the beginning, but hands are tied. Can't do anything about it.
I worked for a company that had a homegrown app. It was a full CRM, like did everything in it. And that app was written so poorly that we had to build our infrastructure to be the whole network infrastructure pretty much, and all the server infrastructure as well, pretty much had to be like 1.5 times what we actually needed just to like, it was a hog, right? So like you had to overbuild it. And this was in the data center with real gear, right? So that it's so let's not forget that happens in the cloud as well. Like especially with the lift and shift where you're going to take an app, you haven't refactored it, you're going to pick up that monolith and that hog and drop it in the cloud. You're going to have to overbuild quite a bit, actually, even at the network layer, potentially, to deal with that.
That's the dumpster fire lifting into the cloud, man. People don't realize that a dumpster fire on-prem is one thing because you at least can kind of finagle things. But yeah, you lift it into the cloud and it's like some things just might not even work. Some things you really have to get super creative to find a solution to make it have that same behavior. That's a good one. I like that.
And it's going to cost like 10 times, right? Because it's all consumption model based. And you've got something like, for an example, you have this app, say like, I don't know, it's a CRM or whatever, and say to retrieve customer data, instead of being efficient about it, it's got to go talk to the database like 30 calls to bring up one page of customer data. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's all potential cross AZ charges. You're going potentially through load balancers. There's like 1,000 little microtransactions happening every time you make a database call.
Yeah, throw DR in there and you're really up.
Oh, yeah.
Because like, okay, are the resources going to be deployed at half mast? Are they already going to be running? Or are they not running and we're just going to turn stuff on if something happens? Because if you're running a whole bunch of stuff that isn't getting used in like an active standby scenario, you're eating that cost, or is it active? It depends. It's expensive though.
In this same vein, I'll ask the next question. So it's about how do we weigh availability against cost as we would on-prem?
I'll let you all go first. I got a lot to say on this one.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're talking about it a lot. So, I guess, like I said, Will, you've made a lot of good points on this. There's a lot of hardware life cycle. There's just a lot of things that are already established that you have to think about. There's like a cadence to how things work. on-prem, right? And I guess in the cloud, it's just so different. You really have to think about, you don't have to worry about the refresh cycles, but you have to worry about things that are going to change in the future. There's just so many different things to think about. Cross AZ traffic, availability zone going down, regions going down. So it's really just a lot different.
Yeah, and a lot of times I see a lot of designs that aren't using like availability zones the right way within a single region. For because you think about it, high availability is like in the cloud world, high availability is like what would be on premises with two switches sitting next to each other. Active standby or firewalls, active standby, active, whatever they are. You have one, it goes down. Well, then you have another one, and that's cloud with AZs. It's high availability. It's not DR, even though they're separate data centers. There's a big distinction to make there. But then when you want to go DR, you have to go to another region, and even the way the cloud providers do this is different because. AWS is like building with Legos. I remember that one blog from, I think it was Netflix back in the day, but it really is. But if you go to like Azure, like we're dealing with paired regions now that go back to the cadence of them upgrading and doing things within their environment. So there's not shared fate there. So there's a lot of different things that you have to consider. And then doing this again, like there's a big distinction also with, hey, I'm designing the next Twitter. I need this sucker to be available everywhere all the time with, capacity. Imagine that the Twitter app that wasn't flaking out all the time.
I was going to say, somebody needs to design it. If you're going to do it, you better get to it quick. We need it.
Yeah. But I mean, the enterprise side, it's much more difficult because you're not developing the next Twitter. A lot of times you might have the bread and butter of your business that needs to be available like across the US or maybe the East region. But then you have a lot of low hanging fruit, and really it has to be a thing of, what do you want to pay for? What is the availability that you want to pay for? What are your DR requirements? There's a lot of metrics there. We need to sit down and understand them. And usually the answer I would always get is we need it to be up 100% of the time.
Right. We can't pay for 5 nines. Can't pay for 5 nines, but we need 100% uptime. I mean, that's a tale as old as time, right? That just followed us straight into the cloud. That has always been the infrastructure builders like dilemma, right? The business wants 5 nines of uptime. They give us the budget for like 3.5.
Yeah. And you can say that, you can show them like, hey, well, actually just take this and double or triple your cost, depending on how many regions. There you go.
Do it.
That's your cost. That's how much it costs. And then usually the response is, well, actually, let's think about this. This isn't in the budget. So,
yeah. And then the whole region goes down and then everyone blames you anyway. Right.
When I worked for that same company, actually there was, we did this thing with hybrid cloud because they didn't want to pay to put, like a direct connect in or whatever. So it was all like site to site VPN stuff, right? So like the web front end was in the cloud, but all the databases were on-prem. And I remember there was a critical P1 incident where, like it broke essentially. Like the VPN broke. It wasn't on our side. It was on, I think it was AWS. Anyway, long story short, I'm doing the after action report, like the whatever you want to call it, to see process improvement. And I went in there and I was like, this is the level of service you paid for. So, there's not really, I have no process improvement. We know what we told you what it would take to get better redundancy for this, or high availability, whatever you want to call it. Essentially the business signed off on the risk by not investing in it, and made the financial decision.
But it's the cloud.
I think I actually said welcome to the cloud when I was done, but yes.
You know what? To that point, I got one more point on this question. So one of the things I spent a lot of time doing this. This was several years back, and it kind of went nowhere, which was unfortunate. But in cloud, everything had, like, every individual thing has an SLA. But then when you put those SLAs together, you get a bigger SLA for something. So when you think of in terms of what a business cares about, like they don't care about the SLA for a direct connect. They don't care about the SLA for a circuit or some component in the cloud. So most applications out there, if you're in the enterprise, it's hybrid. You have something that it's talking to back in your data center. You've got something it might be talking to in another cloud or a service somewhere. So, trying to build like what we refer to it as compound SLA. There's probably a correct term for that, but trying to do the best that we could to actually measure and combine all these things and put together a view of what it would look like for the business with this application, like where all the different components are, because that's what they care about. Is the app down? Yes, that's the problem, and that's what'll get scrutinized.
Yeah, and obviously there's been points made about the bad design where things are just broken in that capacity, but also like related to that is I think people have difficulties mapping dependencies correctly. In that, let's say you're deploying resource A and resource B depends on resource A. And when you're deploying B, you're like, oh, we need to build this, 5 nines, all to the gills, right? It needs redundancy, needs all this built in. But if it relies on something that doesn't have redundancy built in or can't have redundancy just by the way the system operates, then, either you need to fix both of them or to fix none of them, right? You know what I mean? You can only have what the system's capable of in the first place, right? So it's important to make sure that you're don't design the last piece of the puzzle with the biggest or the most redundancy that you can when the beginning can't account for that anyway.
Exactly, and it's got to be so hard to be on a DR team because a lot of stuff is out of your control. And You're just trying to pick up the pieces and get teams to change things. Yeah, that's a really good point, Chris.
Just use microservices, man. And then everything just, will work. And don't worry about the cost because...
Yeah, Kubernetes is just so easy and serverless.
Yeah, very. Yeah.
No vendor lock-in with serverless.
You don't even need a server.
I got another interesting one. So compliance requirements. And I don't know, Will, you might want to take this one. I know you've worked in some healthcare organizations. So are there any specific compliance requirements that you've seen that kind of force cloud costs to go higher?
I could answer this with one word and it would be firewall.
Yes, good.
Of course.
There's a lot of, so working on a little bit of government contract side in the healthcare space versus also working on the proper side, like we're, even on the commercial side, really, there's so many different, like one of the things that I battled and I never could really get a good handle on is a lot of times security comes to you with requirements. They say, hey, this, X, Y, and Z has to be done this way. And you're like, wow, that maybe doesn't make any sense. Why is it this way? And they're like, it's a requirement. And, I got to the point to where I'd start asking like, okay, where's that written? Like, where is that at?
Right.
Like, where is that? And start chasing it down. And what I found on the private side essentially is a lot of times it wasn't actually a requirement. It was like, oh, we did this thing for a while and we're just going to keep doing that thing that way. But when you get on you do anything with government, that's a different story altogether. There's a lot of writing. There's many things in writing, and a lot of things you might not may not make sense to you, but you've got to follow them anyway. You got to do your best to make sure they're followed, because if something slips underneath the cracks, that means some big hits, financially for that company potentially.
I have some things to add to this, but I'll let Chris, if you want to jump in, or Tim, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think the big thing is that like you said, Will, there's a lot of compliance stuff. And then what you find a lot of times is that if you actually chase that rabbit down, depending on who you're talking to, with government, it doesn't matter. There's nobody to talk to. It's the government. You might as well just talk to a brick wall about why that requirement exists. Because somebody passed a law and then 30 years later, we have this requirement. They have nothing to do with each other, but that's why. But in a private organization, a lot of times security teams will, quote certain, PCI or SOC 2, whatever that is. Right. But what I think, just real quick, touching on the cost thing as well. What I find a lot is in the cloud, security patterns or requirements tend to, just like on-prem, affect a lot about how the traffic patterns go. And then we've already talked about the security plus traffic plus weird traffic patterns that are required to make security work can equal just a shit ton of money, right? So we need to be able to justify that beyond just saying, oh, well, security said it's a requirement, right? I think we have to be the good stewards. And a lot of times, of course, InfoSec may not like to be questioned about it, but you have to be able to say like, yeah, but if I'm using AWS firewall or Azure firewall plus all these traffic patterns and I'm using, load balancers and all this other stuff, I mean, there's a serious amount of money involved in running that through this stack, and is this the right way to do it? What is the true requirement here for the business?
I got to jump in here. So do you think, just out of curiosity, that, security and network teams are going to kind of consolidate, at least network security teams, and networking and consolidate into like a single team in the future?
I think we should.
What a question.
I think we should. I do think it's a loaded question. I do think we should, because I don't think you can have security. I mean, you can have physical security, obviously, but like if we're talking about IT security or whatever you want to call it, data security, every bit of it has to include the network, unless we're talking about, burying a server and disconnecting it from the network or something. Like the network has to be involved. So I hope that we will see more blending of the security and network teams personally.
Well,
completely agree.
Yeah. And to kind of give them a little bit of credit, the CSPs, things like, AWS has like gateway load balancer, right? It actually helps a lot. I mean, it makes it very complicated. So that's a different conversation, but at least you don't have to worry about adding a firewall to every single VPC or, just weird things that are going to seriously balloon the cost. So I think those are good things on the whole.
For sure. I mean, there's major like that.
Yeah, so
and I remember
one more point to talk about that. Like, that obviously gateway load balancer is a concept that was recently integrated. So it makes me, this isn't really, privy to the question, but just kind of a thought that I had is it makes me wonder about the constant churn that customers have to be experiencing with new products coming out that, fill a use case for them, but they moved to the cloud when that use case wasn't there, right? So are they just in this constant cycle of migrating to new services? And obviously your security posture or how you're implementing security can have a big influence on how you implement, your networking across the cloud, right? Until you can, and then if you integrate services like this, then, it's obviously hard to shoehorn that thing in afterward, but I mean, cloud is definitely more fluid than it is on-prem, so it's probably easier said than done. But I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
That's great. I just lost my thought. I had a point I was going to add on, so feel free if anyone else has something.
Yeah, I went through just thinking of all the different network and the gateway designs, like going from just VPNs to transit VPC to transit gateway all in like 6 years, like PTSD. It was terrible. And it was very expensive as well.
Yeah, that was the point. So, Chris, to your point about the customer having to handle these things, it's not really the customer, it's the network and security teams, right? Like the devs don't care if, transit gateway came out. Okay, who cares? Right. So that's another thing.
Exactly.
And then super quick, and then we're going to wrap up the government stuff. So like tick requirements, man, tick 3.0 is all about kind of having like distributed points of presence. With adding the cloud into this, that basically means that you do have a firewall at everywhere. And it's just like the government's always
That's
behind
insane.
on these things. But yeah, I mean, it's part of the mandate. It's just how they designed it. And it makes sense why they did it. But man, does it require just some serious ballooning costs and thinking about the architecture in weird ways. And it's just it's a mess.
Your tax dollars at work.
Yeah. And banking industry, right? There's so many other industries that have weird compliance requirements like banking too. So. Yeah. Okay. So let's, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I know we could talk longer, but we got to cut it off at some point. So, real quick, we'll go around and, get any last points. Whoever wants to kick it off, Will or Chris, you guys want to chime in?
Sure. Yeah. Just, kind of like with getting certifications, don't ask me how that made its way into this conversation, but you think of, you just want to go so far, so fast. You like, okay, I'm studying for CCNA. Oh, I'm going to get my CCIE in like 2 years or something. It's kind of like with cloud, like you've got to start basic. You really need to learn the foundations, and the documentation is gold. The cloud documentation is actually very good. I have so many things bookmarked that I refer back to. They're always updated. Well, usually up to date. So learn those foundational things and learn TCP/IP while you're at it. Like really learn it, and that'll take you far.
Awesome. Chris, you got any last points to add?
No, not much to add. I will say typically when doing designs and talking about solutions and things, cost is the bane of my existence. It's the thing I want to talk about the absolute least. But thankfully, you guys have made it fun today, so I appreciate that.
Awesome. Tim?
I think the main takeaway, if you will, is that when we left on-prem, we didn't leave behind the same fight that we've had to have, which is, the business still has to get an outcome, and they have, budgeted a certain amount for it. And we have to be really good about making sure that they know essentially what they're buying, like what level of DR or HA, makes sense. And at the end of the day, it's not really our call, and we need to be okay with that. And we need to just make the business aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to know how to articulate it, which brings back to the point we made a couple times where you really just need to keep up with this stuff. It's changing so rapidly, and there's always new features and products coming out, and new designs and new security requirements and new apps, and just goes on and on. So I think that's good. All right. So thank you all very much for tuning into the Cables to Clouds podcast. If you like this episode, please share it around to anyone you think might be interested. Give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcatcher, and hit those like and subscribe buttons on our YouTube channel. Till next time. Hi, everyone. It's Alex, and this has been the Cables to Clouds podcast. Thanks for tuning in today. If you enjoyed our show, please subscribe to us in your favorite podcatcher, as well as subscribe and turn on notifications for our YouTube channel to be notified of all of our new episodes. Follow us on socials at Cables2Clouds. You can also visit our website for all of the show notes at cablestoclouds.com. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.